Welcome everyone back for the next presentation here at day 3 at the Maxon booth at NAB. We are showcasing amazing artists from around the world and how they use Maxon One products in their workflow to create some of the most beautiful work you'll see on any screens anywhere. To my left, keeping it across the pond, let's give a big round of applause for Phil Roberts.
Hello everyone. So my name's Phil Roberts. I'm a 3D generalist working out of London in the UK, and I run RAID 0 Limited. And I've put together a short little reel, so enjoy. Sweet. Okay. Thank you. So I'd just like to thank Maxon for inviting me out again. Believe it or not, this is my second time presenting. Last time I presented my first year in cinema. And to continue that tradition of those firsts, my presentation today is done solely in Redshift, which I've been dipping my toes into for the last month, being an Octane user. So bear with me, and I'll share some things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully you'll be able to pick something up no matter kind of what your level is. So first we're going to talk a little bit about real-world lighting and how that can up your lighting game, and then we'll look into some kind of trending lighting styles that you may have seen on Instagram or Behance, or maybe they've been in some treatments for a new job, and we'll jump into Cinema 4D and start lighting, using these as reference, and a few techniques to get some really nice looking renders. After this, I'll show you how to use the AOV multipass system in Redshift, and how it gives you flexibility in compositing. I know it's a dirty word to some people, but trust me, your renders will look so much more polished, and the opportunities that are opened up are infinite, basically. So a little bit of background about how I got started. I actually started out as a creative retoucher in a company called Taylor James, compositing photography and CG passes. So coming from compositing, you have to be very aware of the physics of things, lighting direction, scale, depth of field, color correction, the list goes on. All to create coherent images that may be made up of 20 or so different elements. This gave me experience in being on set and photo shoots and video shoots, where if you're as curious as I am about how something's made or put together, it's definitely like a treasure trove of tips and techniques. This isn't everybody's journey into 3D, but I feel like studying real-world techniques of photographers and videographers will definitely help you in 3D. So here are a few examples of real-world lighting that I just grabbed off Google that kind of demonstrate some of the techniques I'm going to go over today in cinema. So if you look up on the top left there, it's kind of how they do AOV lighting in the real world. So the photographer will set up a lighting setup. So maybe they want to light for the body of the perfume, but say it's also casting light on the lid. So what they would do is then move the lights, and they do a separate, completely separate light for getting a highlight on the lid, and then it will be composited later in Photoshop. Now, on the top right there, this is an interesting one where we've got a speaker, and it's kind of like cylindrical, and we want to use the lights to describe a shape of an object, especially when it's product photography. So you see on the left of that image, you have kind of like a key light just lighting it from the side, and it drops off. There's a bit of shadow going around, and it's describing that shape. It's it feels round because it's dropping off behind. Whereas the one in the middle, they've got a whiteboard reflector on the side, and it's actually flattening that cylindrical speaker off, so it doesn't feel as 3D. And then you've got the one on the right hand side where it's really exaggerating the curvature with having a black board on the right hand side. And you can see at the bottom there, like how the photographer's kind of set up his lights. He's got that huge, like just at the top of the screen, you can see that huge kind of softbox kind of lighting down on it, and then he's got the reflector on the side just pushing a little bit more light into the scene. So I've tried, while I've been learning Redshift, I've tried to put together a few kind of examples that maybe have like come across my desk, and things that you might have seen on Instagram and Behance and things like that. So the first one we're going to look at is the barn door. So you can see, like in this lighting scenario, we've got a very strong backlight that's silhouetting James Bond, and then he kind of walks into this light that they're closing the barn doors on the light so that it's really super focused, like across his face, and there's basically no other detail than what's on his face. So this is what we're going to look at in Cinema 4D. So I've just basically got this computer model. I've thrown an orange kind of material on it, and we're going to be looking at creating the image on the right hand side. So showing you how you use the Redshift lights to kind of close those barn doors, so we get a very similar look to what we had with James Bond. Whoops. Let me just go to Cinema 4D. Okay, so we got our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop in a camera real quick, and then I'm going to set this to 300mm. So we got a really super long lens. So we're just going to look through our camera. Scroll back a bit, and then we'll kind of center this up, get it in a similar sort of position to what I had in the thingy. Let's fire up our IPR, and the first light I'm going to add in is a dome light. So at the moment this is like just the default light, so I'll just turn that off. I'll put it on progressive. We're going to throw in a default light first, so I'm just going to put my lights over here. So throw in a dome light, and at the moment that's just obviously lighting everything in the scene. Is a huge softbox basically, so a bit unrealistic in terms of lighting on what we want to do. So let's go into that dome light, and if we go down to the project tab, what we can actually do, because I only want to use the dome light for the background essentially. So what I can do is just drag that computer into that folder, and it essentially just takes away all of that light from that object. And then what we're going to do then is grab an area light. So if I just lock my my camera, and now I can come out of my camera, and then I've got my area light, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of make this a bit bigger and make it very slim, maybe move it back a bit further. And then what I'm going to do is go into the objects, and where it says spread, I'm just going to bring that right the way down, and you can see how like it's a little bit bright at the moment. Maybe we can just bring down the exposure a little bit. So let's go -3. You can see we're now getting that that barn door look where it's kind of highlighting. And all I did on the render that I did is I just wanted to highlight the logo, and I also wanted to highlight that switch that's down there as well. So we can kind of angle that and maybe make it a little bit wider, and maybe just come down on the exposure just even more. So we're still getting that orange kind of paint look. Yeah, so that's how you achieve that barn. And I don't know about you, but I've seen it so many times come across my desk, and it's a very in look at the moment. So let's go back to the presentation. So that was our barn door look, and then another one we're going to look at is gobos. So gobos are like something that you put in front of the light. That in this case they've kind of shone a light through water, and it's giving you all this like caustic effects where you're getting all that nice lighting. So it's still directional lighting, but you're getting all these shadows and highlights of like how it's coming through the water. So I've set up this scene, super simple scene. I've got this tape recorder, I've got a plant on the table, and then a couple of walls in there. So you have this. I think I've only got 2 lights in this scene. So I've got a light, an area light that's just lighting the top of the tape recorder. So just picking up details on the top, and then I've got a really strong spotlight on the left-hand side with the gobo on it that is then kind of raking across the screen, and it's giving that very realistic kind of feel. So let's jump into that scene, see if it will load, and then I can show you the light setup. So I can probably come out of the camera and just show you how simple the scene is. Yeah, so it's literally a table with a tape recorder on it, a couple of cubes, and that plant on the table. And we've got this huge kind of spotlight raking in, just acting as that light, that window light, that gobo light. Okay, so we'll go on to the next thing. So I've put together a case study for headphones. So we're going to go through setting up 3-point lighting on the headphones, so that if you get a brief in like this where you have a product and your client will want to have kind of options on lighting and things like that. So what we're going to do is set up a few different lighting scenarios. So this is the first one where it's a bit like 3-point lighting. Also, we're going to be looking at changing the temperature of your lights as well. Color contrast is another thing that we can really bring to these products, where they might be like white or like slightly off-white, and just having a little bit of color contrast in there just makes it a little bit more interesting for the eye, and it also brings a level of realism where your default light is always white. So, and you very rarely in real life get super white, bright lights. I mean, it's a little bit different now with LEDs and their spectrum, but like old style bulbs and fluorescence and things like that, where that's how you bring that realism. So we're gonna take a look at some of these in cinema now. Okay, so I'm just going to wait for this IPR to. I should have turned the IPR off first, but I'm just going to wait for this to update. So I've just got a camera in here at the moment, and what we're going to do, we're just going to drop a dome light in, and we're going to do the same thing that we did for the computer. Is we're going to kind of exclude it from our headphones, and we're just going to start it off as our background. So again, we're just going to drag our headphones into that exclude on the dome light. And then also what we're going to do in the dome light is, at the moment, it's perfectly white. So what I normally do is I just add a little bit of blue. Like most things in reality have a slight blue cast. Our eyes are kind of used to it because of the blue sky. You kind of like filter it out but if you really look at things, and like this is something that I've learned from doing retouching, that a lot of things have a blue cast. Like when you have sunlight, for instance, like the shadows will have a little bit of blue in, because it's almost like taking on GI from the sky and adding that blue into the dark areas. So I always like to, when I do my backgrounds, I like to just add a little bit of blue in there. And the same for the lights as well. So I like to add color into the lights. So let's add an area light. I'll just lock my camera. So what we're going to do is just like, we're going to make a light that goes above the object. So I'm just rotating it 90 degrees. I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to scale it down. I do have bloom on, so that's why it's kind of like blowing out a little bit. Let's get a little bit smaller. So what I'm trying to do here is I don't want it like really soft. I do want a little bit of a shadow. So like the hard edges on the thing, they're still soft, but you can still see the direction of that light. So I think it's a little bit, we'll just name it key. And I still think that's a little bit too bright. So let's come down maybe 2 on the exposure. Actually, let's maybe just go to 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this color mode, and I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to go to color and temperature, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth into that light. So I might just move it just a little bit more forward, so we're just catching the edge. So the whole time I'm thinking about, like, I've got these headphones, I'm really trying to describe the shape in 3D. So if you can imagine a cube, I'm always trying to get a highlight, a midtone, and a shadow on that cube. And that's kind of how I approach the lighting. So we've kind of, this will essentially be like a highlight, and then we'll grab another area light. And what I want to do with this one is I want to bring a little bit more detail into the kind of earmuff section of the headphones. So I'm going to move this back. I'm going to make this quite small. And maybe what I'll do is I'll actually throw a target tag on here. So if I go to animation tags and then target, and then I grab the muffs of the headphones, and then it's pointing directly at those now. So I'm going to just bring this in slightly, and I might just take the let's name this rim, and I'll take the exposure down a little bit. So you can see what this is doing now. So it's kind of, if I turn that off, you can see it's like picking up if you look at the earmuff section, it's picking up an edge where, again, it's describing that kind of round shape. And we're adding details into the model. So I might just bring that just a touch more in, and maybe just come down a little bit more on my exposure. So I'm not trying to blow the lights out. I'm just trying to give it enough where you see texture, and you can tell that it's kind of lit from that side. And again, I'm going to use color and temperature, but this time now we've got that warm light from the top, and we're going to have a cool light coming from the back, just to give us that extra contrast. So changing that to like more like a bluish sort of hue, where we've got the kind of warmy, orangey sort of light from the top. Now, we've obviously got this like quite dark section now on like the front part of the headphone. So I'm going to add another area light. What I'm going to do this one is kind of rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to bring it down here, and it's essentially acting like a bounce light. So I'll bring this down again, and maybe we go a little bit lower on this one, and maybe just make the light just a touch smaller. So this one again, I want to keep the warmth of the top light. And I just want to touch maybe a little bit of coolness into this one. Maybe not as much as the rim light, but we're going to touch just a little bit, just enough to where it's kind of separating from the background. It's also, there's a lot of contrast there between what's going on the top, what's going on from behind. I know we said it's 3-point light, but I do actually have 4 lights, including the dome light, but it's just acting like a backdrop, essentially. So let's just group these and turn that off, and let's see how close we actually got to what I kind of rendered out before. So I went a little bit cooler with this version, but there's still that element of the warmth from the top. And then with client projects, I like to, even though this is kind of, I've made this specifically for NAB, I like to approach things where I like to give options. So I'd maybe start off with this one where it kind of feels like it's still stylized, but it's maybe a little safe. But then I'd start moving onto, let's say maybe like the Gobo kind of style lighting, where we've got this kind of abstract light coming in. It feels like it's maybe like slightly outside, and there's sun kind of raking through trees, and you're getting all of that dappled light on the product. But again, we've got this dark section here, and I could add another light to the bottom of the product, but what I like to do sometimes is, if we do Shift C and type in backdrop, this is kind of using the GI in Redshift, so we can, like in real world lighting, like I showed before with that Bose speaker, you can use boards to reflect light. So we've got that huge Gobo spotlight coming in. It's now bouncing off the backdrop, and it's giving us that fill light into that area, and it still pops off the background. We've got all of the nice lighting. We've got that rim. We're describing all the shapes. We've got nice raking shadows, and it's just a nice option that you can then deliver to your client. We'll move on to the next lighting setup. This is quite an interesting one that I kind of came across, and I was like, I wonder if I can make that. Like while I've been exploring lighting in Redshift, this kind of light just really, I hadn't seen someone do this before, so I was really intrigued to how to make it, and I'll show you how I made this like gradient in the light. So if we go, let's just turn it off actually, I'll just make it from scratch. So if we grab why is my mouse working? Oh, there we go. Oh, Cinema's crashed. Okay. Let's just reopen Cinema. So what I'm actually going to show you is, so here's that light setup where I've kind of just done a few different angles. Again, that's another thing that you might want to look at whilst you're exploring these light setups. Is like, how much can I move the camera? Like, do I have to move the lights? Do the lights still work at that angle? And these are all, like, this is all the same light setup, and I've just literally just moved the camera around, changed the focal length, and it's just like a nice, interesting way to showcase, that lighting setup to client. It's another way to sell it in, basically. So I'll just open up that scene again. And I'll grab my Redshift IPR. And I'll just dock it again in here. And then just move this over. So we can see, I'll just make sure my render settings are set to medium. And then I'll open up that folder. And hit IPR. So what we want to do is we want to make an area light, and it's the same technique as we did before, where we've got that very slim kind of area light. Actually, I'll just pop a backdrop in there as well, just so we've got that bounce light. Let's move that down. Let's move it across. All right, there we go. Okay, so if I turn my gradient light off, and then we've just got this vacancy, which is essentially just one light, and then we've got that bounce light around everything. So let's grab an area light. I'll set my camera to stay there, and then we bring it out to the front, make it really, really slim. We then come down to our spread. We just take the spread right down. And then maybe our exposure. And then what we want to do, there's this button up here called Add Graph. So what this does is then creates a shader for our lights. So we can just double click on this shader. And then what we want to do is add a ramp node in there. Let's drag that in. And then we attach it to our physical light. And then general color. And then what we can do, like Cinema 4D has loads of presets that we can load up. So let me just try and position this so we can see what's going on the IPR. So if I load something like this, like a rainbow, that's how you create like a rainbow light, basically. But what I did is I used this preset here called Heat 2, and then I just changed that green to like a really bright white. So it feels like almost like aberration, that light is like shining through a prism and it's separating into the spectrum. Across our image, and it is a little bit of like a trickery kind of fake thing to do, but I think the kind of visual impact of it is fantastic, and it was just like a really cool thing that I thought to do, and it seems really effective, and I'll definitely try and incorporate that into work later on. I think it's a really nice thing to do. So that's our gradient light, and then what I did was a more kind of, now we had like 3 kind of versions where it was quite bright, quite light, and then I wanted to explore a version where it's a bit darker. It's maybe like something like a Razer product you would see like with green lights or something like that. And as we've got the logo and it's orange, I thought, why not try something a bit more moody, a bit more like gamer-like, just to give a real like kind of curveball option for those lighting techniques. So yeah, that's the kind of lighting study that I wanted to go through on that. And then I do have another project. It's a little bit more sci-fi, but before that, I'll show you actually how to set up the AOVs in Redshift. So if I go back to my original lighting in here, and what you need to do is, if you just go to each light, so we've got this dome light here, and then if we go to details, there's a section here called light groups. So what we want to do is add a new light group, and then I want to call this dome, for instance. And then we can go to our next light, backlight, and then we add another light group, and we call this backlight. And then the same again, rim. And then finally our key. So now we've got these 4 light groups basically. So what do we do with those? We go into our render settings, and let's make this a little bit bigger. Go into our advanced tab, and we go to AOV, and then what we want to do is we want to enable this. So what this does, it takes your kind of render path of your beauty, but now it creates a new multi-layered pass, EXR pass. So it's going to separate all of our lights into separate passes that we can, whilst going into compositing, we can then adjust things, we can put contrast in, we can change the colors of them, we can tint them different colors, we can change the relationship, the balancing. There's a lot we can do in compositing with this AOV system. So what you want to do is grab a beauty pass, and we can see in here, if I click on that, we've now got our light groups in here, so the ones we just made, and we can click all of those. But it's not just the beauty that we can control as well. We can control things like reflections, for instance. All of our materials that have reflective elements on, we can control, adding a little bit more reflection, or even like using a cryptomat, for instance. Say we've got a watch, and there's a light that's reflecting over the front of the watch, and it's a little bit too strong, but it's also giving a really nice kind of light on our strap, for instance. We can then kind of dial that back in compositing with these light groups, because that light is separate from the other ones, and then we can even separate it with masks to kind of dial it in where we need to, and it's really powerful system. So usually what I would do is I would grab beauty, reflections, and specular. So those are the kind of 3 that I would normally grab for a job like this, where we want to control, just have a bit more finer control when we're retouching or compositing in After Effects. So what you would do then is you just render it out, and I've got a Photoshop EXR in here. Something you need to actually, I discovered whilst I was doing this, in my Cinema 4D file, in my camera, I've actually taken the exposure down by 0.5, and so when you do render it out with this system, it doesn't keep that exposure in your renders. So what you need to do is just add a little bit. If you do have exposure in your camera, you just need to match it. So that's like, if I just link that to that file, and then what we have here, if I just make this a little bit bigger, we've got all of our lights all separated, ready for compositing, and we've got our reflections, and then we've got a specular. So all of those highlights, we can add to them, we can subtract them. So let's just build this back up. So we've got let's put our dome light on the bottom. We start with this one, and then we'll add the rim in. So we'll just change that to linear dodge add. Same with this one. We got a key, and we're just adding these lights as we go along. And then we got a backlight, linear dodge add. And then what we want to do is so with our exposure, that is our exposure from our camera. So now we've rebuilt the RGB. So, but now we have all of this control in these lights, where we can say maybe that one is a little bit too much. We can just put it on a percentage of like 75, for instance. We can then maybe this one, we didn't feel like it had as much saturation as it needed, so we can just up the saturation of that light, or add a bit of contrast, for instance. We can get our curves. Let's just bring this down. Just add a little bit more contrast just in that light and how it's kind of affecting. So you can see there we've just added like a little bit more of a kind of a harsher blue in just in that area. And when I found out how easy it is to kind of render out these passes from Redshift, I've just not looked back, basically. So, like as I was saying, we have got another case study to look at. That was more of the product side of things. This is a bit more of a kind of sci-fi, kind of slightly different, like how we can light a larger scale scene. So, I did create this specifically for NAB, and it's a little kind of short called Inception. So a little bit of reference. So I grabbed these from ArtStation. It's not my work, but I did use these as kind of a visual reference on, how I wanted to have the camera, like what kind of atmosphere I wanted to create, and also the colors, the contrast, like how the lighting is kind of silhouetting things and being brought out by lighting. And yeah, I just thought that these were like a great reference. So this is just a little kind of animation I've put together. We can actually go to the next one. So this is it, just fully rendered out. So it's just from Redshift. It's got no color correction on it whatsoever. I've kind of got all the contrast with exposure and just balancing the lights in the scene. And what we're going to do, we're going to go into After Effects, and we're going to composite this, and then we're going to compare like what we have now, which like to most people is not that bad. Like it feels balanced. We're describing shapes, and we're getting a sense of atmosphere, and there's a sense of depth, but we can push it a little bit further with compositing. So I'm actually going to skip to the end frame, and this is our render, just the RGB. But what we've got here is all of our render passes, like we had in the Photoshop file. But I've rendered out another set of volumetrics, because I've got a Redshift environment in my scene. It gives us all that kind of misty kind of look in the background, where all the lights are. They've got volumetric kind of rays coming down as well. So I rendered out with the AOV system, rendered out all of the lights where they contributed with the volumetric lighting. So I can show you one of those passes. So we got the spotlight. Where's another volumetric one? That's nice. You can see there. You can see all those rays coming through. And what we're going to do is we're just going to build up this scene. So starting off with my beauty, and then I'm going to take my dome source. So if I hit, I'm actually going to change the blend mode to all add, basically. We're adding all of these in. So this dome source, so I hit T on the keyboard, it brings up the opacity, and then I'm just going to take this down to 75%. So we're just bringing some of that beauty source underneath back through. And then our backlight source, you see it's quite blown out. So we want to bring that down to maybe like 30%, just so it's not blowing, it's completely blowing out. And then we've got a volumetric backlight source, again, really blown out, but with the power of compositing, we can just change those values. We've got our fill source, so this is like the light that's kind of coming in from the front. It's just giving a little bit more detail there. So we want to bring that down to maybe like 30% as well. Our gunfire, we'll keep that at 100%. It's just a little bit of extra light coming from their guns. The key source, we want to be at maybe like 20%, I would say, on the right hand side. And then our under source, we'd be at 20% as well. So all I do when I get these passes is I just have a play around, basically, on getting all of these values and what I want to bring out in these shots, how much of a bias I want to, towards one of those shots. And then we've got a volumetric under source, which is also 100%. Okay, so we can kind of see what we've done there. So trying to make it like a little bit more cinematic and bringing out areas. It's maybe that some of our like back source lighting is maybe just a little bit too heavy. But basically, I have a finished version here where what I've done is I've kind of built those up the way I did before, just to give it a little bit more of a cinematic look compared to the kind of very balanced version from Redshift. We've got that. If I flick them on between each two, and then what else I've done as well is I've added some Red Giant looks effects. So if I go into here, I can show you what I've done. Basically, it's when you get renders out of a 3D package, I always like to add like lens effects and diffusion as well. Like you've got this glow here, so we can control how much of that bloom is happening in looks. So I did like normally these presets coming like really hot, so they're really over exaggerated. So you just need to dial them back. It's just to show you, how like what's being affected. So I've got a bit of optical diffusion. I've then got lens distortion, and then I've got edge softness as well. So it's just like getting some of these lens effects that just adds a little bit more kind of realism to the shot. Now, something else like a little bit more fun that we can do, if I just close this out, is what we can do with all these lights. If I go back to my composition. Actually, you want to go to this one. Well, I'm just going to delete some of these ones that I'm not using out, just so we can see what's going on. So another thing we can do is because we have all of these lights separated, something that you might want to do, I don't do a lot of this, but I thought it was quite a fun thing to do, is actually we can time these to music. So if you're working on, concert visuals and things like that, it's just like an extra thing that we can add to our renders that, it may be hard to keyframe in 3D, but we can control it in 2D. So if we just bring in a track, and then we go keyframe assistant, convert audio to keyframes. So what it gives us is this adjustment layer that we can then just twirl down, and it gives us left channel, right channel, and then it gives us both channels. So just for the purpose of this one, I'm just going to delete these ones out, and then I'm going to use both channels. And if I click on that, you can see all of these keyframes that are in here. So if we have a look at the graph editor, so this is the music, and it's going up and down. And then what we can do is we can map our lights to that slider. So if we alt-click on the opacity, for instance, we get this twirl down, and then what we want to do is just pick width over to the slider, and then what it's doing is taking that attribute, how it's going up and down, up and down, up and down, and then it's driving our opacity of our light. So what you can do is just go through all of your lights, and you can, change whether it's opacity, whether it's scale, like whatever it is, you can control it that way. So I can show you the kind of end result of that kind of exploration. Yeah, so it's just a little bit of fun, just kind of getting those lights to work in this scene that's kind of, it feels like it's kind of a moment in time, but we've got that camera pulling back, and it's just an added layer of animation, basically. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. If you want to check out some more of my work, it's raid0.com. Just look me up online, all the socials, Raid Zero. Yeah, thanks very much.
All right, Phil, thank you so much for that. We have time for a couple questions before we get ready for our next presenter. So live audience, there he is.
Yeah, so
the question was?
It was why am I adjusting the exposure rather than the intensity? I think it's just a habit thing from actual, working with real lights and working with cameras, like how you would, stop down exposure on a camera just to let less light in, or expose up to get more light into the scene. And I just think it's easier to kind of, in my head anyway, just to kind of balance all of those lights, and with the camera, just getting all of those exposure elements correct.
You don't have dimmers on all your lights?
Yeah.
Very cool. Any other questions for Phil while we have him? Well, if you do have any questions, Phil will be in the back of the booth for the next hour, so you'll be able to check him out and ask any questions that you have there. He'll be able to showcase that with you. But stay tuned. We're going to have another presentation up here next in about 10 minutes. And you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be Nicholas with Adobe. He's going to be showcasing some Substance workflow, too. So very exciting stuff. Stay tuned. Thanks again, Phil.